Hello and welcome to the In the Money Players podcast. This is our show for Tuesday, January 17th. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornatale, back with you in the Brooklyn bunker once again, wrapping up my bachelor weekend here in Brooklyn, which I spent, as you're probably not surprised, you probably could have sussed this out on yourself, betting on football and horses and drinking way too much beer. Family are coming back today. That's probably good for my liver and maybe my bank account, the way that some of these photos have been going lately. But we'll get to some of that a little bit later to look back at this interesting, sort of lower key, but still interesting weekend of racing with me. We bring in one of our regulars here from InTheMoneyPodcast.com and from Sam Houston Race Park. It is Nick Tammaro. Nick, what's going on?
Doing great, my friend. Halfway through January already. Can't believe it. It's flying by, especially when you spend weekends doing what you did.
Yeah, it wasn't too bad betting-wise. I got to the last leg of the coast to coast, and it was one of those things where I was just wrong. You know, I really thought you could lock up that last leg with two horses. I had one backup ticket live. It wouldn't have been anything great. You know, I think I was getting about 4-1 on my money. Had it come right, it went wrong. And in truth, the football wasn't too bad. I just stinging a little bit. I had now it just seems like the most muggish opinion I've ever had. But I really thought that the basically I played the Tampa-Dallas game. I played it that at some point in this game, Tampa will be favored. So I took an early position, took the pre-flop position on Tampa, and basically was just ready to bet it back the other way anytime they got to 4-5, and then just to win on both sides. And of course, it was one of those things. Just basically, they did get to evens, but it was a one-way train, and I just felt like a mug betting on a 75-year-old man based on his reputation. Not the kind of play that I'm supposed to be making, probably.
Yeah, it was a little disappointing in that regard. Though a Texan, I am no Cowboy fan, but it was. I found, I don't know, maybe it was with my own betting, but I found myself watching way too much Tampa, and I think after week 5 or 6 when they lost a road game, I think to Carolina. And I got knocked out of my survivor pool. I watched them. No, it was when they lost to Pittsburgh. I watched them and I was like, this team sucks. They're not good. They've got a really good defense, but their offense is just abysmal. And so I think that when we got to week 16 and they beat, or week 17, and they beat Carolina in what would have been the game where they would have lost the division, everybody was like, okay, well, you know, now they're getting their act together. And unfortunately, the Cowboys are good.
As a Giants fan, I love that sentiment. Unfortunately, the Cowboys are good.
Oh, and I tell everybody I'm Texans, Giants, and whoever's playing Dallas. So those are my roots. So I will wear my Lawrence Taylor jersey on Saturday.
I've got one right here in the bunker. We'll bust it out if they can get the miracle.
I think I'm going to wear it on the show at Sam Houston on Saturday. Unfortunately, nobody can watch it, but but I told Frank at Sam Houston I was going to do it. So no, I'm excited about the G-Men. I'm some of our esteemed friends are Philadelphians, and they've been annoyed with me for weeks because I've been chirping at them about how overrated the Eagles are. So this is like a big put your money where your mouth is situation.
So I'm in a situation in a loser pool. It's just like a survivor pool, but in reverse, where you have to pick the team that loses, run by a friend of ours. And so my choice is I either have to pick Dallas or the Giants to lose next week. I'm not touching the Bengals-Bills game, and I've already used Jacksonville, so that's out. What should I do? Do I separate heart from head? I haven't seen a line yet on the Niners, but I mean that's going to be less than a touchdown. The Giants line 8.5 on the math. I'm supposed to pick against my beloved Giants as sort of a hedge, which I'll do from time to time, but I don't know. Maybe I just go with my heart and pick Dallas to lose. I mean, the 49ers are pretty good.
Brock Purdy. That's your man. Pick the Cowboys to lose. Look, on the math, you're absolutely right. The Giants are far more likely to lose than the Cowboys. But I don't know. There's a little element of that Giants team that doesn't realize they're not supposed to be there. Yeah. And those are really dangerous teams. I mean, this is usually the best weekend of football of the year. And so the things that, and you and I could probably go on a huge tangent about this, but the things from last week that are going to matter is that Seattle played San Francisco well in the first half. And then obviously San Francisco just has so many weapons, and their defense is very, very good. So they're going to stifle you at some point. And when they hit Seattle with that barrage, it was over. So the question becomes, is Dallas going to hone in on what they can do offensively to keep San Francisco off balance? Because, I mean, at the end of the day, this guy is a rookie who's only started like 8 games. And you probably can rattle his cage a little bit. The line's 4.5. So, I mean, which I thought it would be around 4.5. That's a good way to get two-way action, right? It's kind of a dead number. Cowboy fans are going to jump all over it, and the Niner fans are going to say, oh, God, I mean, this should be 6. So I think, I mean, in all likelihood, the Eagles are a more likely winner, but I think it's a go with your heart kind of thing.
And there's a game theory advantage because everybody else is going to be, a lot of people are going to be in the same position. So you potentially can get value. You don't know what other people are going to do, but just logically, I figure 3/4 of the people left are going to do the math play. So
obviously you don't have the Jaguars available.
Correct. I use them week 4 or whatever.
Yeah.
I tried to keep some of those lower tier playoff teams on side, but I do not have them. Otherwise, there'd be no conversation. Only one of the 12 people left has them. It's one of those kind of things. So that person will skate. Everybody else will sweat. It's going to be fun. All right. Unscheduled 5-minute tangent on the NFL, but I don't think too many people mind. There's quite a Venn diagram of audience, I think, between those two topics. Let's talk about some horse racing, though, and we'll start off with looking at some 3-year-old colts from the past weekend. There was one stake race I had on my list to talk about, the Pasco, which was the 6th race at Tampa, won in an upset by a great name for this horse should be running in Louisiana, Zydeceaux. This horse had run a very solid figure back on debut, but that was in a maiden claiming 16. Runs in 80 here, wins wire to wire. The connections have to be feeling really good about the $15,000 they spent on this horse, who tries every time. Recurring theme in these 3-year-old races we're going to talk about today: Lasix on for Zydeceaux, part of the big figure improvement. Champion's Dream went here as a big favorite, switching barns, going out for Mark Casse for the first time after being in the care of Danny Gargan. Curious to see if you thought that one had any excuses. Feels like unlikely a race that's going to have much of an impact on the Triple Crown Trail, but certainly some horses who will come back and run in these other key Tampa Bay preps that hopefully we'll be talking about right here on the Players Podcast. Curious to get your thoughts on the Pasco.
Yeah, I mean, probably not all that influential with regards to the trail, but I guess Champion's Dream was probably a horse that you wanted to see how he'd run as a benchmark for some other horses that we've seen. And it was not the most compelling performance by Champion's Dream by any means. And obviously losing to a horse like Zydeceaux is not something that you're gonna put on your CV. But this is a race that there was a Mike Trombetta horse that won it like 3 or 4 years ago that ended up winning the Forgo. Was his name Win?
Yeah, that's right.
Came from like 100 lengths out to win the Forgo in a driving rainstorm.
Yeah, I remember. 2020.
Yeah, and so he was a horse that jumped up in that race and earned, I think, like a 90+ buyer speed figure. Champion's Dream, I shouldn't really go too hard on him because he did run well. I mean, they peeled off about 8 lengths in front of everybody else. So
and he was lit up and like smacked at the break too. That was if you forced me to conjure an excuse, I would have said maybe that those early stresses took some of the sting out of the finish there.
Yeah, and he ended up chasing inside down the stretch, which wasn't the most advisable spot to be in. So I think there are some angles there that you can deal with and make a little case for. So we'll see how if any of these resurface in the Sam Davis. It does come back a little bit quickly. It's 4 weeks, so we'll definitely. I would imagine they'll try and stretch the winter out, and I would expect that Champion's Dream will be there. Mark Casse is already planning apparently on running Wonder Wheel there.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, I feel like he keeps going back and forth on that one. I've heard him in my
that day against Phillies.
Oh, okay.
In the Suncoast. Yeah,
because when we had him on last year, he spoke very confidently about wanting to run her against boys. And then, subsequently I'd seen that she was going to stick to sex, which only makes sense at this point. If she blows you away there, you only need the one prep against the Colts to get into the thing. But I'm not really seeing that whole thing. But, he dreams big.
This is like the classic, everybody talks about it and then they look at them on paper and they're like, oh,
Yeah.
they're not competitive at all.
Yeah.
And the same thing with Who's Your Philly. It was like, okay, so you guys had good 2-year-olds, right? First of all, the pack's going to catch up to you in the 3-year-old ranks anyway, in your own gender. So why don't you see how you do against Phillies first, which is what Mark is doing. And obviously he's a Hall of Famer in 2 different Hall of Fame. So Halls of Fame, I should say. So, and I'll trust that he's going to do the right thing. I don't think we'll see Wonder Wheel against males in 2023.
Let's pivot now to Oaklawn Park, an allowance race there, first level allowance, won by a son of Justify called Verifying. This horse appeared on our radars based on that nice Saratoga win, graded stakes placed in the Champagne, and looks to have not just come back fully formed, but to have grown up some. A 97 by our speed figure. And, just taking a quick look at the numbers, if that's wrong, it's probably light. Once again, Lasix on, and we'll get to that tangent question here. Maybe we'll do it now, asking, how horse players need to be looking at this question. But first and foremost, where does Verifying now rank for you amongst these 3-year-olds?
I mean, he has to rise up the ranks a little bit, right? I mean, it's foolish to say a horse that ran a race that fast isn't worthy of some consideration. He had a good trip. He was up close to the lead, and his 2 wins now have both come when he's had some amount of control in a slow paced race. He obviously wasn't on the lead on Saturday, but he was very close and pretty much ready to pounce. What you want to see is how he comes back in a race like the Rebel or, somewhere else where Brad Cox may try him, and see how he runs without Lasix, because it looks a little bit like this is a situation where he was probably helped by having it. This is a horse who there was always a lot of buzz about. As you mentioned, he won on Travers Day in the opener. He beat a weak field, but he did it the right way. And so we all were a little intrigued by him moving forward. And that's why he got some support in the Champagne and was expected to run well. So, tempered enthusiasm, I think, is the right way to put it. Like to see him do it without it. Brad Cox has just an embarrassment of riches with the 3-year-olds right now. It is incredible. And, we said this a couple of weeks ago talking about it. And I made mention of the fact that if
Nick appears to have frozen for us. Let's see if he can come back, or we may have to edit, but hopefully we don't have to edit. Maybe he'll leave and come back. Let's text him. But one of the things I wanted to talk about was this general idea of Lasix. We got a question when we were out in Arizona. Somebody asked me about Oh, Nick, did you come back?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, excellent. We got you frozen there for a minute, but I was filibustering. But I was starting to tell the story about being out in Arizona and being Jessica Paquette asked on the panel, what horse players think about industry issues like Lasix that within the industry people spend so much time talking about. And I said, basically I said something to the effect of, I don't think, in terms of the global picture of racing and what our concerns are, I don't think the horse player thinks about Lasix that much. We just want a level playing field, something like that. But when you're talking about handicapping, you got to think about Lasix because it's another critical variable in races. And I feel like especially this time of year, when you're looking at horses coming from 2 to 3, rising 3-year-olds that are liable to step up anyway. And, I wish I had actionable information to pass on and say, oh, okay, when they're on first time Lasix, you can expect him to improve 2 to 4 points or something. But it's not that linear. It's not that straightforward. And, it's something I look at, and obviously I want to be cognizant of when a horse like Verifying now comes back and tries to run off the stuff. But I don't know, I don't know. I'm finding myself wishing that we had an answer to this question one way or another, and we were able to just stick with it, because it makes horse players' lives in terms of trying to figure out form and bet with confidence even harder than it already is, and it's already never been harder. Do you have any advice for the viewers, for the listeners, about how to approach these horses adding Lasix for the first time, and or when a horse like Verifying comes back and is now off Lasix? What do you take that form? Do you take that figure literally? Do you build in a little bit of decline? How do you handle it?
Boy, tough one to have a pretty comprehensive answer for. I agree with you that we want a level playing field. I think that in this situation, because we've seen it was such a clear step forward first time at 3, And, I remember there was an angle that I heard sort of kicked around in years past. Rich Perloff would actually talk about it on TVG. He would say, how they've grown. And it was take the first start of a horse in a new year and see where they were relative to where they were prior and consider whether they just might be taking a big step forward. And, you're going to see that Verifying will have a huge progression in his thoroughgraph pattern. And he obviously had a huge increase in his Beyer speed figure. So with him specifically, I would probably lean more to the side of this is a horse who's just improving, because he already did show that he was relatively fast without Lasix. Now he's grade 1 caliber with Lasix, but he's not running on Lasix anytime soon in a graded stake race. So I think you'd want to give him that one shot in a graded stake race, even without Lasix, and just see where he fits at that point.
Now, I said that if the figure was wrong, it was low. Craig Mokowski would very much disagree with me. This is interesting. Taking a look at Timeform US, had as a 104 on there, equating to more of like a mid-80s Beyer. I was just looking at raw times and comparing them to some of the other races on the day and thinking that number could have even been closer to triple digits. It feels like the Beyer team are particularly, cognizant of erring on the side of caution when it comes to numbers that are going to be in the 3-digit range. You're a figure maker. I don't know if you've looked at this at all, but I just thought that's a really huge disparity. And I'm just curious to get a little bit more intel. And if you can't do it now on the fly, maybe send a tweet later about what you think about the times earned there. But, maybe Craig obviously knows infinity more than me when it comes to making speed figures. So I might be wrong, but I am tempted to give credence to the Beyer in this case at first blush, but would love to hear what some other figure makers have to say.
Did Craig have the pace slow?
He wasn't coded slow.
Okay.
It is unusual, though. The pace line for Verifying on Craig, 107, 99, 101, 104, 106, which is just interesting to me. That sort of suggests a push button horse that has that speed to get into position, can settle, can finish. I mean, so I love the pace line on Timeform US. It's just that final number, like I said, 104. That's still solid, but that's not going to put you in, anybody thinking you're a top 5 Kentucky Derby contender.
No, I mean, that's actually going to have him lower than the Champagne, right? So right. He earned a 108 in the Champagne, went second behind Blazing Sevens. So yeah, I mean, it's going to, from that point of view, it's a little disappointing, I guess is the right word, but you don't often get that kind of disparity. So I am intrigued actually at what the thoroughgraph figure will end up being. And I'll tweet that out when I find out. Usually our mutual friend Steve Bick will let me know if I ask, and we'll take a look at that, because that'll be worth taking a look at for sure.
Yeah, interesting. So maybe the jury's still out a little bit on this horse, but yeah, I still think the conclusion that you mentioned, the cautious optimism, feels like the right way forward. Let's talk about some of the 3-year-olds who ran at Gulfstream, and Gulfstream's 5th provided one of these. I mean, this is how I'm going to frame it. You could tell me if I'm imposing a narrative where there's a simpler or better explanation. But the old William Goldman line about what works in Hollywood, nobody knows nothing, comes to mind, because you had a couple of Todd Pletcher runners in here. You had Cuvier and you had Sergeant Pepper. Love the name, Sergeant Pepper. Sergeant Pepper being a $1.6 million baby who, from the reports I heard, the whispers I heard, had been working with and outworking Cuvier. And that's logical in the way they were bet, with Sergeant Pepper being bet down to 6-5 and Cuvier being bet to 9-1. It's Cuvier who wires him, earns a 76 speed figure in the process. It's just one of these things. Like, obviously it's well worth doing you'd much rather have the workout info than not have the workout info. But, maybe it's sometimes the preference, the lean for one over another from an angle like that goes too far. I mean, they're working pretty close together. One's 6-5, one's 9-1. The 9-1 wins. Just one of those funny situations that makes you throw up your hand as a horse player, to me.
Yeah. And Cuvier kind of took the worst of it, right? He got all the heat on the inside, and Sergeant Pepper had much more of an easier run stalking. Then they got inundated a little bit with other horses when Alid Lassi made a big move around the turn, and so did Practico. Cuvier was really game, though, really dug in and came back and ran a race that I wouldn't have expected. So the interesting thing about Sergeant Pepper is that, of course, he is a half sibling to Spice is Nice,
Yep.
who was owned by these connections. And it was also obviously out of Dame Dorothy. Of course, there's a big difference between paying 1.6 million for a filly and for a colt, especially one that looks like he might be parted with his parts at some point. But I kid. I mean, at least at this point. But so I thought, so here's the thing. Mike Welsh, the DRF Clocker report called Cuvier better than Sergeant Pepper in their last work.
Wow, that's great. That is not the whisper that I had heard, but that's a great pick and a great call.
Well, and what it said, and I just pulled it up, it said well matched and looked good going from the gate in company with Sergeant Pepper. Jose Ortiz was riding, broke well, and looked to be going slightly best after a half mile, galloped out nicely, good move for both. Now, the difference was that prior to those workouts, he had been getting nothing but B minuses. And so I think that maybe the fact that Sergeant Pepper had worked well prior to that and then worked well again, even if he was slightly second best, is probably what led a lot of people there. I'll tell you the other thing too, Pete, the public loves betting big purchase prices. I mean, they just assume that the more you pay, the better the horse is going to be. And boy, bloodstock agents would just eat that up, right? They'll just take that to the bank. So yeah, interesting effort. The race itself was pretty slow. So there's going to need to be some improvement in this group. It's really the horse I think we're going to talk about next that I thought maybe from a practical standpoint was a little bit more interesting on Saturday's card.
Another big purchase price. We'll get there. I don't want to give up on Sergeant Pepper. I'd like to see, on pedigree, you wouldn't necessarily say this, but it could be in reality. More ground will be the friend. We'll see. We'll see what happens with those Pletcher runners and all the rest coming out of that fifth race. The horse that Nick was referring to ran in the 8th race. Really nice breeding on this one. Kingsbarns. The buyer figure's just a 74, but I mean, this is a $800,000 purchase, an Uncle Mo Tappet cross that I thought visually was very impressive and looks like potentially a runner to follow. Let me see what I haven't pulled up what the time form number is on this one. I'll do that just as we speak right now. And of course I pulled up the wrong race. So there it is, a 99 on time form. So yeah, right in line with that. That's like an 80 buyer speed figure. And this looked like a nice winner. What did you think?
Yeah, didn't have the most comfortable of trips. Didn't have a bad trip. I want to make sure I don't use the wrong word there because he did end up getting a very nice run through. The thing that I thought about this race from a pace perspective, I'm also generally going to gravitate more towards a horse that debuts and wins at a mile than 6. Just having that sort of box of distance checked. This is a horse who actually his workouts were kind of going not the wrong way, but he worked well with Shesterkin, who had broken his maiden a few weeks before for Todd Pletcher. I liked this field. I thought this field could actually be okay. And, other than basically the race collapsed and Kingsbarns was the only horse who was anywhere near it early. And they looked to be going pretty quick down the backstretch. Pete Aiello made reference to the pace being strong. And, Luis Saez kind of wedged Kingsbarns behind horses. He was waiting for room. When he finally got room, he burst through. And then here came these 2 Bill Mott horses that had been a mile out, and they start rallying down the center of the track. And he's got enough to hold them off. And it didn't, it just didn't look like a race that went according to plan. So I thought that was, if I could find a newly turned 3-year-old that can overcome adversity a little bit, I thought that Way Hill Road, who took a lot of money in there, went off a co-favorite and ended up finishing 4th. Actually, I think may have ended up finishing 5th. I think he might be okay. So, this was a race that was a little bit more interesting to me.
I'll give Prairie Dunes another shot. Now, probably a horse that's going to need a setup, but just struck me. I love the way this horse was finishing, and the pace was coming back, but it was still, it was a good enough run with enough trouble, being carried absurdly wide before it that, if I'm looking for a best closer in at some point down the line, in some spot where Prairie Dunes is theoretically too slow, and but I think the pace is going to come back. Maybe a horse that can score at a big price somewhere along the line. Game Warden of the 2 Motts seemed to be the one that was maybe just a little bit more. I mean, ran very well, but a little bit more flattered by the setup. I wanted to take Prairie Dunes out of this race as well.
The interesting thing about Game Warden was that Irad was riding him. I thought coming into it, there was only one Todd. So, and the thing that I liked about this race also was that on the workout reports, there were a lot of horses training well. So it felt like a group that might be, Archangelo, for example, who finished fourth, came in with a B+ workout and had a promising debut. And Sarah Shaman, who set the pace and ultimately tired, that horse had been training well with another Safi Joseph runner that looked okay in the past. So, there were just a few angles there that this might be a slightly better race than it initially looked.
And I think you're making a bunch of good points that folks should be paying attention to, especially newer players. That idea of finding a key form line, not necessarily, people talk a lot about a key race, which in theory is a race out of which more than one winner comes. But I think there's at this point even some more sophisticated ways of just trying to identify a race that was quote unquote good form, whether because it came back fast early or fast late, or because, like Nick is saying, that you had a horse that played out almost a little bit more like a maiden stake just because there were a lot of well-regarded horses in it. So it's a form line to watch. And, you get a couple of runbacks and they run a couple lengths better than you expect. And then you could start to really maybe dial up what you're going to do with the horses that you really like coming out of the race when they appear. Or if it turns out we're wrong and these horses come back and they're underperforming by a few lengths, you say, maybe that race isn't as good as I thought. But it's the kind of race that I'd make a note on that would appear in my my past performances going forward, just to see if we're right about it being an interesting one to take horses out of going forward. Let's talk about some 3-year-old fillies. Why don't we do that? And we'll go to New York with the Busanda. And this race, the first thing I think of is I really expected Affirmative Lady to run better, but I suppose we should start talking about the winner, who ran pretty darn well, Occult for Chad Brown. The figure on Timeform US was coded red throughout, and Occult was right there. Ends up with a 97 on the Timeform scale, a 78 on Bayer. I mean, this isn't the kind of thing that's going to make you say we have seen the Oaks winner, but I thought the interesting talking points were, how good do we think Occult is? And maybe the interesting thing about Affirmative Lady being kind of meh is doesn't do much for that Julia Shining form from the Demoiselle, which was Julia Shining being a horse I was already sort of saying, hey, when can we find a spot? I mean, I know people love her, but I just on the clock, I want to find a time to bet against her. The Affirmative Lady performance did nothing to dissuade me from that idea. But let's start with the winner. How good do you think Occult is/was?
I like her. So the things I like about her, I love that she's gone the 9 furlongs already. I think that introducing that kind of stamina component this early is a really good thing. And, being that Chad Brown wanted to run her long as quickly as he did, I think is a positive sign as well. She erased the bad debut pretty quickly with a good second start. And, there was a point just approaching the quarter pole where you could tell Dylan Davis kind of got into her, and she responded pretty quickly. And she looked a little reminded me kind of like Search Results as a early 3-year-old filly, that she was able to move pretty quickly and pretty decisively. Gambling Girl and Affirmative Lady, at this point, they sort of are what they are, right? I mean, they were the horses that ran second and third in the Demoiselle. The Demoiselle was not a fast race. It was run on a wet track, so you don't know who maybe was helped by the circumstance, the surface, anything like that. It is not the most rousing endorsement of Julia Shining. But the one thing I would say is that we all sort of knew Julia Shining did run kind of a ridiculous race in there, being as wide as she was. And she's just such a, and we've talked about this before, but she's such a hard horse to watch and like feel any kind of warm and fuzzies about, because she's just, you have to ride the hair off of her. And Louise Size was in a drive for like 5 furlongs. So that being said, it isn't the most rousing endorsement of Julia Shining, and Gambling Girl looks like she's probably going to be just kind of a decent 3-year-old New York bred filly. The problem that we will run into with Occult is that she will probably only run once more before the Oaks in a race like the Gazelle, because Chad is not going to back her up distance wise. And honestly, there is not a particularly prestigious mid-range prep between now and those final preps leading into the Oaks. So, you're not sending a horse like Occult to Oaklawn for the Honeybee or to Fairgrounds for the Silver Bullet Day or the Rachel Alexandra or anything like that. So, it kind of works that you just shelve her until Wood Memorial Day and bring her back in the Gazelle and she goes 9 furlongs, 9 furlongs, 9 furlongs. He made the comment afterwards that she needs to get faster. And I never argue with the trainer saying that about a horse, but in this crop, Pete, I don't know how much faster she has to get, right? I mean, if you're getting mid 80s buyer speed figures, you're in the range. She got a 78. But that was also on a fast-paced race. And so, I think there's a real argument to be made that Occult is kind of an under-the-radar solid player on the Oaks Trail.
Interesting. Well, let's continue with horses that may or may not go that way because they were just going 7 furlongs on Saturday. But we had back at Tampa Bay the Gasparilla Stakes, and this one was won by Opus 42, another one of our pretty sure this was another one of our get Lasix and start going faster. Big step forward, improving from a 61 buyer to a 76 buyer. To your point, not the kind of figure that's going to make you say, hey, can't wait to stretch her out and see what happens for the Oaks. But it was a 98 on time form. Interesting pedigree on this one, too, by Mendelssohn out of a Lemon Drop Kid dam. So you would think going farther would not really be a problem. And Arnaud Delacour is one of these trainers who I'm sort of just waiting to have a big horse in a Kentucky Oaks or Kentucky Derby type thing. I've respected his work for a very long time, and yeah, this one I thought was at least worth a shout in a race where the big favorite Darth Vader, my Star Wars hunch play, was just kind of a no-show. But though did have a disadvantageous trip. It just did so little running. I can't endorse going forward. What did you think of the Gasparilla?
Yeah, I thought it was a pretty compelling performance by the winner. Totally agree on Arnaud Delacour. I mean, it's easy to, I guess, to forget that he's had some good horses, but they've not been in this context, right? They've not been Oaks or Derby horses. Very good trainer and excited to see what this one can do moving forward. I mean, nothing about the race made you feel like, oh, I don't think this horse could stretch out. And so we'll see what ends up happening all in all in that next opportunity. She'll probably get a chance to lock horns with a horse like Wonder Wheel in the Suncoast and see how much she improves from there. So I thought it was solid. I thought she took heat at the right times and fought horses off when she needed to and did so while moving up in class. So always a lot of positives there.
Yeah, we're chatting with Tampa. Hopefully we're going to have those on the main network. If nothing else, we'll be covering the big Tampa days on the plus side of things. One more race at Tampa we will talk about, though, because it's one of the favorites of the show, was back in action, past the Champagne. Wanted to see her win, but I feel like this was one, and you could tell me if I'm, being too much of a homer for our friends at Black Type Thoroughbreds, Nick. You're never afraid to tell the truth. But I thought this was a better than it looked effort. An 89 figure off the bench. I wanted to see her win, but I think it was just one of these paid for the early exertions. There was some red time form US fractions, goes down to a perfect trip winner in Tap Dance Fever. Tap Dance Fever, I thought, was an interesting one to talk about. I think it's a case where just how important the trip was in this instance, because usually I see a 5-year-old pop a big number like Tap Dance Fever did last time, and I expect that was even an off the turf race. It's the kind of figure I'm like cutting in line to bet against, and she backed that right up with a nice win, albeit with a perfect trip. But I think past the Champagne, off that long layoff, I think she can move forward and be a player in this division.
Yeah, I think she had to do some dirty work. I think the other question that I have with Past the Champagne long term is I don't really know where she fits distance wise. I don't know if she's probably more of a pace stalking sprint filly mare now, or if she is more of a 2-turn type. They were well clear of third and everybody else in there. So I don't think it's a big concern that that's where she finished. Beth's Dream, who she chased early, is a very fast horse. And I do think like I said, I think she did all the dirty work. I think she did all the heavy lifting. I thought she responded very favorably when asked. And I would envision that she'll take a step forward next time out. I'm interested to see where it is, though. I don't know kind of what they want to do. I know that they also have an older filly that they want to give an opportunity to run in some good races, Hidden Connection, who's coming to the Houston Ladies Classic on January 28th. So we're excited to see where she fits as well. So, yeah, this is a funny division this time of year because there really aren't that many opportunities at a variety of different distances. So, bringing her back at a mile and a 16th, I think made it clear that they'd like to test her at a distance. I would say right now she feels like a horse that long-term would be pointed to a race like the Ogden Phipps. And, this is a division that was really, there's nobody left. So other than Nest, right? And so you're going to see, the questions with Nest become, is she going to come back as good? Is she going to move forward at 4? Is she going to be Malathot or is she going to be Abel Tasman? Right. So, there's differences. And fillies are funny because they don't always come back the same. And so I thought it was a good effort. Yeah, I don't think there was much shame in defeat. Losing to a guy like Gerald Bennett on his home turf with a horse that got a perfect trip, nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, they're it's not like she didn't stay. She was slowing down a bit late, but she attacked that hot pace. Interestingly, Timeform has this one faster. Timeform gives Paso Champagne a big upgrade for attacking that fast pace. Actually, on the form figures, the ability figures, comes back a 118 to Tap Dance Fever's 116. But even the raw 113 is still even faster significantly than the buyer. So this is I'm pretty confident saying this was a good effort. Our friends over there should feel real good about themselves. Curious to hear how she comes out of it and what happens next. Anything else, Nick? I feel like we've covered what was on my main agenda. Any other notes you wanted to hit on before we get out of here?
No, covered a lot of bases. Look forward to chatting next week about the Lecomte and some of the fairgrounds action. Things are certainly heating up.
Yeah, we'll have some coverage. We'll cover the big one on the main show. Maybe we'll do a little plus stuff. It might be time for another Frank McGoey visit. We always enjoy those, especially now.
About you,
your TV co-star Frank McGoey
right.
From many years ago, Nick. Folks don't know what we're talking about there. You can find it right here on YouTube, the World Horse Player Tour. Such a good show. Darn pandemic got in the way, but maybe someday it will ride again. I'm not giving up. That's for sure. But yeah, we'll have some good coverage of that for sure, and some other stuff along the way as well. So that's going to do it for this edition of the show. Thank Nick Tammaro. We'll thank our founding partners, 10 Strike Racing and the Thoroughbred Retirement Foundation. Check out what's going on over there, trfinc.org/players. This show's been a production of In the Money Media. Our business manager is Breeders' Cup Betting Challenge champion Drew Coatney. Our chief creative officer is Jonathan Kinchin. I'm Peter Thomas Fornatel. May you win all your photos.